Hello and welcome, as it is the 14th of December 2018. My name is Derek, all bets, trades of the like within one's own risk reward. In this video, it's going to be a mixture between the Bitcoin chart, and we'll move it on to another alternate coin. I think it's Decred, maybe Golem. I think it's Decred though. But whichever one it is, I'm going to go through that one next. Then hockey information and ways of playing this, both against on the Vegas odds and in fantasy hockey, for two games, one tonight and another tomorrow night on Saturday. All right then. So Bitcoin has broken down below this level of support established on December the 7th. That was in at 32.12, currently 31.88, or a little under 200 points to the 3,000 target as the pierce above that number gets closer and closer. And it usually hits that number and pierces extra. So I'm expecting within moments, within the next few minutes or hours, that it's going to come into place. It may not, but every time I think, oh, we're coming soon, there's always a stall period. So that might happen on a very short-term level. We'll see. On the single hour time frame, there's this sideways consolidation that it is obviously broken down from. Same thing as we can see short term here. However, remember, you see something like this, it's either one of two things. It's either most likely going to that 3,000 on this particular move, or maybe it's that failed move, sort of like we've seen so many times where it breaks a key support level. Well, it's now just doing that. So if in the next hour and a half or two or so, if it manages to make it back up, that would be it. But I don't think that's going to be the case amongst the situation for such. Now let's cross over to the alternate coin, and it is that of Decred. So how do I trade this? Well, every time the markets go lower, I'm a buyer. So did I sell in the middle of October when this happened? Yeah, of course. When a market goes from 58 up to about 85, the question isn't if I sold, but if I was able to get a second sell in or not. And I don't know if I had one or two in, but I definitely did. And then on the way down, buy. My last buy was in at 44. So I bought in here. And now that it's gotten up to close to 55, or 50 rather, I put a sell in. So within such, on my strategy, you're in a bear market, there's two places to buy. Conservatively, where it came from. And that was 44. You maybe want to go in the 43s even. That's the conservative level. And aggressively, well, a decent, whatever you consider a decent leg lower. So 38, somewhere around there. So either one of the two spots, I'm going on the conservative level within that. Now, as far as where I look at the next sale, well, there's a key reserve previous support level that I can see in the market. So therefore, support roughly around here. And probably even go a little bit higher than that. So I'm looking at a move, if it breaks above right now the 18 average of highs, to go to 56. So whenever I say a lot of times, oh, this is a key area where I think it'll stop going up or stop going up or down, generally speaking, that's the areas I like to put buy and sell orders. And that will be it amongst that chart. But I'm going to put the Bitcoin back on the screen as we view it via the 5-minute time frame, and talk about hockey. And when I talk about investing, technically speaking, you can invest via sports gambling. And there's many forms of legalized sports gambling available, including fantasy sports. I'll talk about both aspects of how you would play it in both games. Tonight, in Edmonton, the Philadelphia Flyers are going to be facing off with the Edmonton Oilers. And I can bring the covers information up to show this game. Wins, loss, and these two numbers represent how many losses in overtime and that of a shootout. I just add these numbers together. So 12 and 11 for the Flyers, 11 for the Edmonton Oilers. And I can bring the covers information up to show this game. Wins, loss, and these two numbers represent how many losses in overtime and that of a shootout. I just add these numbers together. So 12 and 11 and 17 for Philadelphia, and a 5-9 road record, or excuse me, a 7-8 road record. Edmonton barely over 500, 17-15 at home, and overall, and at home they're 9-5 on the season, and it's been profitable betting on Edmonton all year. It has been a loss betting on Philadelphia, and the average team, of course, should be down because of the juice that each team has. 71% of the public is betting on Edmonton, so therefore, most likely all of the pro Edmonton bets will be getting worse and worse throughout the day. The game starts at 9 o'clock Eastern Time, 6 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, or whatever 6 o'clock is. And recent meetings, you know what, I'm not going to look too much at history in the game, especially in a non-conference game. As far as where they came from, Philadelphia had a night off. They've been on a 3-game road trip. It started in Buffalo, where they won 6-2. In Winnipeg, they lost 7-1, and in Calgary, they lost 6-5, and they have one night rest. So that's going to be an advantage for them. Edmonton's not going to have any rest, at least all but one player, as they did play last night, but the goalie had the night off. And this is what the game is really going to come down to. We can see they've allowed 13 goals in the last 2 games. 6, 8, we have 2 goals, 4 goals, 2 goals, 4 goals, 6 goals since November 24th. And even here against Buffalo and Tampa, they've allowed a lot of goals. And it's an interesting game because both teams have new goalies on the opposite end of the spectrum. Philadelphia's had injuries to both of their regular goalies, and now their third stringer is looking terrible. Edmonton has just had poor success in the past with their goalies, and they've got this new guy up, and he is dominating. So within Edmonton, they have played against Winnipeg. Their goalie did not play that game, but they lost 5-4. Winnipeg's a good team. So is Colorado. So the fact they allowed 4 goals to Colorado, that's definitely justifiable. But they did score 6 against them, and Colorado's not that good of a defensive team, but that's what you expect. Winnipeg is pretty good. Calgary's a very good defensive team, and they beat them 1-0. Minnesota, they beat 7-2. This team is finding ways of winning. They have won 4 of their last 5. They have won 7 of their last 9 games going back to November 27th. But they might be a little bit tired playing 2 road games in Colorado and Winnipeg was last night. So it's a travel night. There won't be any practice for them. So therefore, given the fact they got a weaker opponent and they're at home, should at least help out a little bit. Philadelphia was supposed to have very high expectations this season. They added James Van Riemsdyk to their lineup, but he has not been that much of a contributor to that team, much at all. As far as some statistics is concerned for the game, Philadelphia is playing with 3.1 goals for, 3.69 goals allowed. That is just terrible. And Edmonton 2.84, and then 3. And if we go to the last 10, though, we can see it's even worse for Philadelphia, allowing 4.2 goals a game. And they're scoring 3.3. Now, if Edmonton wasn't having a great goaltender in net, I'd probably just talk big about the over in the game. But I think finding ways for Edmonton to win by major scores, especially if you can find some good prices. I haven't seen them for the like winning by 2.5 goals if you have an amazing spread. This is the type of game where Edmonton should win like 6-1, 6-2. They can really blow them out here in this particular spot. Now, as far as the goaltenders are concerned, they don't have it on that page, but they do have the names written on here. So let me just go and scroll it so we can see. It's the Stolars guy. 89% save percentage versus a 93%. I guess if I click on this, we might be able to see a statistics this way, which is what is really important. 10-3-1, 2.20 goals against average, 92.7 save percentage. So he's really helping this team out significantly. He's coming off a bad game, and after all of these performances, 0 allowed, 4-1-2, 0-2-3. I really like to play guys who are hot off of one bad game, especially when you win it like that too. So therefore, he faced 43 shots as it was. So it wasn't as bad as it looked. He was definitely tested very much so within that game, but he has been very much doing well and contributing as he has won 5 of his last 6 outings. And then when we go to the other side and we look at Stellars, which I might be pronouncing incorrectly, but that's not what it's about. 2 wins and 3 losses, a 3.80 goals against average, 89% save percentage, and he's coming off a 6-5 loss, a 7-1 or a 7-1 loss, and consistently 2 goals, 4 goals, 2, 4, 6 allowed. I'm playing the entire first line on fantasy hockey and DFS, Daily Fantasy Sports. So the entire Connor McDavid first line, the left winger, center, and right winger. That is how I'm looking at it for. So this is a type of game, you don't get them too often, where there's just a huge high chance of a blowout. And same thing is going to be the case on Saturday in this one. Although I might suspect the over might be an okay bet in this one. We're going to be looking at Toronto versus Florida. Toronto comes into the game with 21 wins and 11 losses. And Florida comes into the game with 11 wins and 16 losses. I've got a lot of information on this game. And by the way, let me just check out on Bitcoin. That's not what I wanted to show. And it's just still slowly declining. Low is at 31.61. But within this game here, we can see that Toronto on the road has been spectacular, much better. 9-6 at home and 12-5 on the road. They're playing a Florida team who is 6 wins and 9 losses at home. There might be more Maple Leaf fans in this arena than Florida Panther fans. In fact, it's Mum weekend for the Toronto Maple Leaf players, mums. So the vast majority of the mothers were in the game last time against Tampa and at this one. And the Leafs got their asses destroyed against the Tampa Bay team last game. So I think they're going to really be pumped up for playing what is one of the worst defensive teams in the National Hockey League. And Toronto's amongst one of the top offensive teams in the NHL. So amongst this in recent history, the home team has been the dominant output. And I'm going to be looking at a lot of recent Toronto history, but not as so much in this head-to-head series matchup. For Toronto, they've been struggling. They have lost 3 of the last 4 games. And they even had to beat Buffalo in overtime, which means that the opponents have managed to get 7 points in the last 5 games against Toronto. And Toronto's only managed to get 5 themselves. It also means, again, for the over-under, we've got a lot of these Leaf games where points have come allowed or have been across a lot. I haven't done much research on Florida. I'm doing that now for their recent results, although I know their defense is terrible. And they lost to Tampa, a top team. Carolina, not so much, and they beat them. Boston, a good team, but they've struggled. And historically, they've done decent in the regular season against Boston, but not that night, and not the night before either. Well, they beat them here, but not before that. Detroit, bad team, they lost to. And Buffalo, they're an improving team, they beat them. Now, as far as Florida is concerned, they're getting destroyed. Allowing 5 goals, 4 goals, 5 goals, 5 goals. The Leafs should score probably more than 5 tonight. That's the big one right there. Or that night, on Saturday night. I'm expecting 6 or more goals from this team. Toronto. This team is terrible defensively. When we look at the statistics, they have allowed 3.57 goals this season, where Toronto has scored 3.56. So wouldn't they average about 3.5? No, not necessarily. There's reasons for why it would be higher. One, because if a top team, which 3.5 is, comes in, you would expect the average team to score 3.5, an above average team to score more, and a below average team to score less. And Toronto would be in the second, or one of the top 5 scoring team. As far as home and away is concerned, Toronto has been scoring on the road, 3.88 goals per game. And Florida's been scoring a lot too at home at 3.5. So I'm really thinking the top play in this game is going to be taking over the goals by both teams. But playing any type of Toronto props to win by multiple goals is most certainly, I think, a good play as well. But I think the top play is for the goals. And then for fantasy, playing players on both Toronto, but mostly Toronto, but even some Florida guys, I think is going to be the way to play. Austin Matthews might get a couple goals in a game like this. But statistically speaking, as the Leafs just managed in their last game to score, let's bring it back, they scored 1 goal. They haven't scored 0 or 1 in a little while, not in this and even a little bit before then. So I looked at some history upon such. And this year, in the game after which they either scored 0 or 1, they have a 3-2 record, 16 goals for, 9 goals allowed. Average score of 3.2 to 1.8. And the rest of the way, they're 18-9. So they haven't got any big amount of wins. But last year, 10-4. And they totally outscored their opponents big. 48 goals, averaging 3.5. Although they did average 3.5 on the season. So what that showed is they actually played good defensively after a game where they didn't score. But the rookie year is where they made a lot of those mistakes, as they were 7-10, but they still managed to score 3.3 goals. So the whole point of this is, after the Leafs don't score much, they score more than they average, or they should score more than they average. This one is the one I think is most impressive, or why I think there's going to be a lot of goals for Toronto. They're playing a bottom tier defense tonight. And in their rookie year, when I say this is the third year for what should be a possible Toronto dynasty. And this year is when Mitch Marner, Austin Matthews, and William Nylander were all in their first season together as rookies. They were 9-6, outscoring their opponents 57-42, and games where the teams allowed 240 goals or more in that season, outscoring their opponents 3.8 to 2.8. And the rest of the way, they were outscored and they lost more games than they won. The only reason they made the playoffs that season was because of the fact that they got a lot of overtime wins or losses. They've improved that this year. They've only lost once in overtime this year, but they obviously put a lot of goals against those teams. Now last year, against teams that allowed 260 goals or more, because there's been more scoring last year, and even this year it has picked up even more so. So if you see a large number that's like 6.5, I still like the game over the total. They were 16-5 against teams of the lower echelons of defense, against these 7 teams that were at the bottom. 81 goals for, 50 allowed. Average win by goal and a half per game, which means there would have been a lot of 3, 4, 5 goal wins along the way. And then 33-28 record outside of those games, outscoring their opponents 3.2 to 3.0. This year, against bottom tier opponents, and we're using the worst 7 teams in goals allowed per game. So I can't go goals allowed because some teams have more or less games. They've only had 4 games, and they've only went 2-2 in them. And the games where they've played against the weaker teams, they've outscored their opponents 17-15, averaging 4.3 goals, allowing 3.8. And 19-9 record overall in games not counting those 4, outscoring their opponents 3.5 to 2.6. And just for fun, I thought I'd take a look at how they do against spectacular defensive teams. So in their rookie season, they there was 8 teams that allowed 212 goals or fewer, and they went 8 wins and 13 losses, being outscored 64-61. So they scored less at 2.9 than they did during the games where they didn't play them. And then the season after the rookie year, there were 9 teams with 229 goals allowed or fewer. And I put Boston in stars because 8 of those 9 teams were from the Western Conference, and then Boston in their division. So therefore, that's definitely of worth note. And they had a good year against Boston in the regular season that year, losing to them in the playoffs. 12-7 record they had in those games, outscoring their opponents 3.6 to 3.0, which meant they actually scored more goals than they did on average against the top teams, which was interesting. And that year, they scored 3.9 against the bottom tier teams, which means I thought, well, let's just check against all the other teams, which is 7 teams here plus 9, 16. So against the other teams in the league, they were 21-21. So against the teams in the middle, they didn't really play as well. Against the really bad and good teams last year, they played magnificent. And this year, they haven't played so well against the top teams, including the last loss against Tampa Bay. They're 3-5 with being outscored 2.6 to 3.5. And what this means as well is when they're playing middle tier teams, they do even better. But given they're playing the Florida Panthers, who are struggling almightily, and the mothers of the players at the game after they were humiliated with their moms watching them in Tampa, it's one of those psychological spots that I look for. These games don't happen too often where you can put multiple reasons why a play is very strong. Now, if you want to bet on the Maple Leafs or the over, I would predict that the smart money and the public money will be on both the Toronto Maple Leafs and the over. So I would think that once the earlier lines might be a little bit better, although sometimes they may be a little bit juiced when they're early. But definitely a game, I think that the Leafs, which again will have a lot more fans, they have the craziest fans in the world, where if you watch any of their road games, they flock them. But there's some cities they flock even more. The close ones like Buffalo, Detroit, Ottawa, and Montreal. There's a lot of fans going to those cities. But Florida, during the cold season, on a weekend, and tickets very easy to get there and not that expensive all compared to other NHL arenas and other road games Toronto would have to go to, is going to have a large amount of fans. I would even guess that there'll be more fans wearing Leaf gear than there are fans wearing Florida Panther gear at the game. All right, so that's it. And I still made this over 20 minutes, but I do believe it's one of those. I don't talk about hockey much often, but I really thought it was one of those games. I was going to mention it against Tampa Bay, but the problem I had with Tampa, it was one of those games I really wanted to watch and see because Tampa's a team you don't want to fade, and I thought about betting on that of the Toronto Maple Leafs. I liked the over in the game. I didn't take it, but that would have been a loss because it was a 4-1 net result. Bitcoin on the short term as I leave this, it's been down to 31.60. And now it's just taking a little bit of a breather, but obviously everything is telling me that it's en route to the 3,000. If you see monster volume coming in at any time on a down move, that tells me that chances that could be where the washout is higher than normal. But I think it's more normal when these bottoms come in that you have some significant size volume that would come into play. And we can see now that our volume is just so tiny right now. And I don't think if the volume can get back up and reach some of these numbers on the daily chart. You've been having large volume as it is, but if we can definitely get it if we can get it matching this November date, or at least greater than this here. But yeah, if it match or go greater than this, then I'd be looking at that as the area for where we might be saying, okay, we might be getting a bounce from that point on. But it's getting closer and closer to the level I've been talking about, going back to like, oh, it would have been back in here. Have yourself a great day. Bye bye.